Hey guys, hello. Yeah. So today we will be doing our acid-base balance, right? And we know what acid is. It is a compound which forms H plus ions in this solution, meaning that stuff, it is like the protein donor. And for example, when we're having some kind of carbonic acid releasing the H plus ions. And we're having the base, and the base is like the one who is like the proton acceptor, so who catches the protons, for example, and this can be some kind of bicarbonate, for example, right? So judging from this, what we already know, we can easily say that we're having acid-base balance when we're receiving and accepting the H pluses, and acid-base balance, it is for maintaining a normal hydrogen ion concentration in the body, right? And this balance is achieved by the utilization of the buffers into the extracellular fluid and intracellular fluid. And this is happening by our respiratory mechanisms and also like the renal mechanism. With the respiratory mechanism, we are having our excretion of the carbon dioxide, and with the renal mechanism, we are having reabsorption of the bicarbonate and secretion of the hydrogen ions. I guess that's clear, that's easy. That's the beginning of our full journey in the acid-base environment. So we already mentioned that we're having the protons, right? And somehow the proton concentration, it is connected with the pH, right? And we already know that there is much pH. pH is high, meaning that there is low proton concentration, and vice versa, right? That's the basics. But how we can express pH into the logarithmic equation, and how the pH, logarithms, and proton concentration, are they all together, let's say, connected? And yeah, we would not discuss like these formulas unless we will need it like for the other parts. So yeah, I guess we already started that, so you know that pH, what it is, whatever is written there, this is logarithm of the logarithm of tens of the concentration ions, right, from here. So what gives you this idea from here? What is this telling you? So what's like information it is giving that? So meaning that this part, it's not equals. Inverse, the minus is inversing, so meaning that whatever I said that we are having a high pH, we are having low hydrogen concentration, and low pH we are having high concentration. It is expressed through the logarithm like that. So to write mathematically, it will be correct writing like this, right? So normally the normal concentration of the ions, it is like 40 multiplied on 10⁹, and if we are putting in that logarithm equation, we will get like the pH of 7.4, and that's why our blood concentration, like normal pH, is around 7.4. So depending on the amount of the pH, amount of the hydrogen ions that we're having there. Clear this part? Do you have any questions till here? Okay. So, you can't read the text, right? Is it too small? Okay. Just like when you will open PPTs, you will able to read it, but like, yeah, text is important here. Whatever I will speak right now, it is all written. Yeah. So, we wrote the formula for that, and it was like this one, right? With the pHs and inverse logarithms, right? So meaning that inverse logarithms, it means vice versa, what we discuss normally. And so there is like the idea of the logarithm in this understanding of pH. It is that like the combination and the pH and H let's say changes are not linear, so it is expressed in this kind of okay, yeah. Can you see? I need the board, so yes, that's fine. So idea between like the pH and H, that the pH and H are not dependent on each other linear. What does a linear dependence mean? Proportionally. So yeah, and regarding the pH, it's not like that. It is not linear. It is called logarithmic, like as you see here, right? So here it is mentioned that if we will increase like the pH from 7.4 to 7.6, there is a reflecting decrease of the concentration of the proton ions, meaning that like it's not like linear how it is going straight ahead. So there is a much more less or much more decrease or increase the protons depending on what pH we are talking. We should know that normal pH it is like between 7.37 till 7.4, and the alkylemia it is called when we are having more than 7.442, and the acidemia is below that. We all know that also, right? We're just going through the basics. Questions regarding this stuff? No. Amazing. So, how we can produce acids in the blood? We're having the violate acids and we're having non-violated acids, meaning that what are difference between them? So, violate acids are the ones who can be easily breathed out. They can easily be violated. And this one is, for example, CO2, and it is produced by the cell breathing itself. And when it is combined with the water, we are having this reaction going on, and it is like the basic reaction for acid-base balance normally. So CO2 plus water, we're having like which enzyme here? Carbonic anhydrase, which is giving us H2CO3, and then it can be divided into H pluses and CO3, right? If you carbonate. And carbonic anhydrase is the doing this reaction. However, CO2 here, it is our violate acid that, as you know, it's giving us the proton and also the bicarbonate, which is alkaline molecule. And we're having non-violated acids, which are called the fixed acids, meaning that they are more, they can't be breathed out, you know. So this kind of acid is called sulfuric acid, for example, and sulfuric acid is creating from the protein catabolism. We're having also like phosphoric acid. It is also created from the phospholipid catabolism. And normally we're having around 40 to 60 millimoles a day of these non-violated acids created. And also we're having other non-violated acids like keto acid, lactic acid, or salicylic acid, depending on what kind of pathology or what kind of disease we're having. So for example, we are having beta-hydroxybutyric acid or acetoacetate acid. Both are the types of the keto acids, and they are created when we're having untreated diabetes mellitus, or for example when we are having the lactic acid, which is generated from the too much exercise because of the our glycolysis process, or sometimes when we're having the hypoxia of the tissue. We are having also salicylic acids, which are created from the overdose of the aspirin. We might have also formic acid, which is like when people are drinking like the methanol or ethanol injection, we get the formic acid, and also we're having oxalic acids or glycolic acid, and when we're having the ingestion of the ethanol glycols in this case. So as you see, a lot of stuff, and normally we're having like the from normal processes like phospholipid catabolism or protein catabolism created our acid environment, non-violated acids, that means the same fixed acids, but also some kind of, whenever what we are doing from lifestyle like drinking or like taking drugs, anything can give us like the non-violated acids. Clear this? 2 questions, yeah. Yeah, fixed acids, like I will be more honest, fixed acids are ones who can easily be out of the cell through the kidneys. Like CO2, yes, like one is breathing, one it is like more metabolic function. Like violated are more breathing stuff, and the catabolic ones are mostly like the fixed acids. Okay. We will see that, yeah. Shahid's question. Ethanol ingestion, it is like the, let's say, brother of the ethanol, right? Methanol. So whenever we're taking some kind of chemicals, for example methanol, it can give us like the formic acid after the conversion. In the factory, you are having like ethanol and methanol together in the same bottles, next to like similar bottles, and by accident you ate methanol, or you want to kill yourself and like you drank methanol. In another case, in old Russian country, like villages, that when they don't have like money for the ethanol, they are drinking methanol, and methanol it is, for example, in the perfume that after the shaving. So they are drinking that, so that's the ingestion of the methanol. What's the bit? Yeah. Aftershave, yeah. Yeah. So yeah, anything like from this they can be used, or also, yeah. So we've discussed what type of acid we can have and what kind of acids that can be created, either violated or the fixed acids, but somehow our human body system tries to manage these kind of situations always with the, for example, buffer system, right? And what's the buffer? Buffers are such kind of elements or such kind of molecules, like they are a mixture of weak acids and with its conjugated bases, or weak bases with its conjugated acids. So they are paired together and they are controlling the range of the pH, for example. So we are having weak acids, for example, by nomenclature. The acid form is called HA, and it is defined as a donor of H+, right? I guess it's easy. And regarding the base stuff, base form, it is called A-, and it is defined as a BH, and in that case H is acceptor, the acid-base nomenclature. And buffers are ones who resist the pH changes, and it can be added to the solution and removed from the solution as we want to get high or low the blood pHs, right? So we're having Henderson-Hasselbalch equation, if you remember this. Are you sure you remember that? Okay, then I will just not type it, or we'll just fastly go through it. So we're having Henderson-Hasselbalch equation, and it is like in this form we're having the generation of the our acid form, right? And what does K1 and K2 mean? You said you remember Henderson-Hasselbalch. It's pK. Yeah, but like what does K1 and K2 mean in this case? It's not dissociation constant, but it is constant, yeah. pKa is way different. Okay. It's just the constant 1 and constant 2, meaning that, for example, when we are having some kind of formula like this, it can go on both ways, right? And it is demarcated with the K1 and K2, right? I wrote the same because we will transfer with different. So, in judging from this mini formula, we can say that HA can be we can create A's and B's, and vice versus we're combining A's and B's, we're creating some kind of weak acid, right? So, how to demarcate that, and how to make it more, let's say, easy to write, and how to create both same on the both sides, how to write it mathematically, right? So we can say that, for example, K1, it's constant from HA, right? And it will be the same as the K2, K2 constant for H multiplied on A minus, right? The first formula. Questions regarding that? No? It's basic math, guys. So we just take the constant and multiply it, meaning that on both sides we're having this similar stuff, right? Okay, how now to express this in the formula with what does this mean now? If we're having K on the right side and K on the left side, it means that we should divide them, right? To write it in the formula, like that's two lines means division in this case. So we'll have like this K1 divided on K2 will be H divided on H1, right? Judging from that, we can refer like this, like in any other form to write the formula, right? And now as we're having K1 and K2 together, we should use like one K1 constant, right? So, and if we will write 1K here, we will have like, we are removing it back, and we are writing this one. So from that we got some kind of K constant, and this is called the equilibrium constant, where we can say, and how we are able to calculate is it acid situation in the blood or the basic situation, for example, in the blood. Okay, you got that? Questions? Yeah. So from the reaction forward and reaction backward, we just calculated we're having some kind of equilibrium constant, and we said that in physics this equilibrium constant is some kind of number. Okay, so we the idea of this is that that we're having what K1 and K2, which is like one big K, and it is the equilibrium between acids and basics together. Okay, like between the acid and dissociated stuff. And the final is giving us that we demarcated like the first beginning constant into the one something big, that it is our K constant, K equilibrium constant. Okay? Yeah, now I'm finishing with the handle Hasselhoff. Yes, all the equilibrium is always one. So, now what we need acids, right? So, to get the acid from that situation, what we're having, the K constant, right? We're having this K constant. Now we want all kind of, to have like H's, right? In the front. So meaning that instead of the K, we will write just protons, and we will get like equilibrium constant hi divided on I minus, right? So we just took this h and we changed h into the instead of k, right? So we took out h out of the round stuff. That's it. Now, how we can express like this what we are having here into the pHs, right? So we understood how we calculate the equilibrium constant between the acids and bases, but how it can be expressed in pH. So as you remember, the pH formula, it was minus 10 logarithm out of minus logarithm 10 out of the concentration, right? So here to get it here, we are writing that pH, meaning that this part minus logarithm on H pluses will be like minus logarithm of K minus logarithm of HA divided on A. So if we're taking into the logarithm, every structure, every part should be taken into the logarithm itself. So minus logarithm on H will be our pH. Logarithm minus logarithm K, it is our dissociative constant pK. And we are meant like with the logarithm HA divided on A. Why there is plus and there is minus? Because when we are changing these parts, see, it is changed there, minus is added, so there we had minus and one minus will be added, minus will be our plus, so that's why we're having here the plus. So idea from that is like pH is our pK. They are the same, like as how much the dissociation will have, we will have like the almost same pH, and in pH it is pK plus the logarithm of the dissociative substance. Clear? This is the Henderson-Hasselbalch equation. Okay, so I guess it's really easy if you know math, if you know why they are changed. I tried to explain like step by step how it's going, plus you already studied that, so yeah, you will get it somehow, I hope. So we are having Henderson-Hasselbalch equation. From judging from there, we can say that like pH it is logarithm of tens, pK it is like equilibrium constant, but like it is whenever we are talking about K, it is equilibrium constant, but whenever we are talking about like pKa, it is already dissociative constant. A concentration, it is the base form of the buffers, and like HA, it is our acid base form of our acids. Yeah, what does A minus means? It is like acceptor for the H pluses, and HA, it is like the H plus donor. And when the concentration of H A's and I minuses are the same, meaning the pH is like the same, equals to pK of the substance. So meaning that when it is like the same, here we will have 1 and logarithm from 1 will be 0. So meaning that pH will equal to pK. And if you remember the titration curve, we are having this Zwitterian position, and meaning that the substance will be in its Zwitterian, right? Okay. Zwitterian. When pH equals to pKa on the titration curve. What? I will type it. Zwitterian. Did you get it? Okay, so now let's talk about the pK more. Let's about more informative regarding that. So pK is a characteristic value for a buffer pH. Why it is characteristic value? So when we are having some kind of acid added to this when we're having situation when the buffer is added to the acid, we are always trying to find the buffer with this almost same pK, because when it is dissociating, it is like changing +1 -1 of the pH, right? So for example, when we're having strong acids such H chlorides, they are more dissociated into the H pluses and minus pluses, so meaning that they are having higher equilibrium value, like higher K, and meaning their pKs will be high. And vice versa, if it is like when we're having weak acids, like they are having less equilibrium constant, and their pKs will be high. So it is always vice versa regarding the equilibrium and the pK. And the titration curve, our favorite, what I mentioned. So in the titration curve, we're having how pH is buffering the solution, like the acid solution, and how the H pluses which were added are removed. So when we're having H ions are added to the solution, we are having HA combination, and thus like it is accepting the H ions, so we're having some kind of already the substance together. The buffer, of course, is more effective in the linear portion of the titration curve, right here. Yeah, and in other cases, like it is like mostly like really smallly adding and like working and changing the pH really slowly. And I've already mentioned this with Sherman position, when the pH is the same as pK, and it is like meaning the HA concentration is equals to A minus concentration, right? Do you want to do example regarding the pH to calculate that? Yeah. Can you repeat? Yeah, titration curve. Even without explanation, I can tell you that if you got the formula, you will get why it is most effective. As I mentioned in the beginning, right? I've told you the pH, it is like minus logarithm, right? And the linear means like the more you are adding, more will rise, right? And with the logarithmic one, it's not like that. Logarithmic, like there is not standard change. So if I'm, for example, if I put one step away, it doesn't mean that I drink like 1 cup of water. So that's why. But I will explain the titration curve. Like the answer to your question is that. So see how we are writing the titration curve. What's titration? What's titration, Shahid? Yeah, that's the titration. So exactly here we see that like we are adding small amount of the H pluses to see at what level we're having like pH rise or decrease of some kind of substance, right? So and why we're having like logarithmic curve, because like we're having minus logarithm in the pH, and that's why. And meaning that when it is like linear, there is like the straightforward, like we are adding 2 electrons, and we are like rising the pH with like 2 points, so that's why. So yeah, so there's an example pK of this product. What it is written here is buffered pair is 6.8, what are the relative concentration of the H2PO4 and HPO4 in a urine sample that has pH of 4.8? So we know here the pK of these two products, right? And this is like the acid, this is like the A minus form, and it is like 6.2 or 6.8, and we know the pH. We are writing instead of the pH 4.8 then 6.8 plus like the logarithm out of these two, right? So meaning that to convert it here, logarithm out of this substance will be minus 0. Then we're titrating them more and more, and the final answer will be 100. So from this buffer pair, the HPO4 it is like I minus, as I mentioned, and H2PO4 it is like HA. So in the Henkel-Hasselbalch equation, it means that like the H2PO4 it is 100 times more than the HPO4 in the urine sample of the pH 4.8. So we took the logarithm out of it all here. I know what you are calculating here. Steps are missing. How we took this everything into the minus logarithm and both of sides, and how we took the logarithms out of it, and then we multiplied on 100 to have one full number. So these steps, like mathematics steps, are missed here. One. Because logarithm was taken out from this. The logarithm was taken out, exactly. Like when we got logarithm minus 2, right? Then like the logarithm should be removed. We removed logarithms and multiplied on the 100 to have the normal number, and that's why. Okay, the fact is like first equation 4.8 will be 6.8 plus logarithm this one. So how will you calculate this equation? You will calculate this equation if you will take minus 6.8 on the 4.8 side, right? So that's how it switched the positions. Oh, not to have like the minus, like this is written correctly, which is more, and that's why. Yeah. You got it? Okay. Yeah, this is the same one I was talking about. So we've talked about like acid-base balance. We've talked a bit about the buffer system, and now we are having for renal acid-base balance our compensation, right? So buffers are always the first line defense what we are having, and most common buffers what we are having it is our bicarbonate and non-bicarbonate compounds. Non-bicarbonate compounds can be like the proteins or phosphate or hemoglobin. And blood, it is like most common buffer system because like there we're having almost everything. and also regulate the pH binding and releasing of H pluses from the hemoglobin and like the carbonate. When we want to change, check and change the pH, we're using the buffers. Most effective buffers are within the 1.0 pH unit of the pK. And we're having classification of the extracellular and intracellular buffers. Extracellular buffers are the ones who are major components in the extracellular fluid, like the bicarbonate, and it is produced by CO2 and the water. The NPK of CO2 and bicarbonate will be around 6.1, and we're having also minor composition also with the phosphate, and phosphate pK it is like 6.8, and it is like in two forms, in the acid form and A minus form. It is APO4, Q minus is A minus form, and acid form will be H2PO4. And phosphate is like most important urinary buffer. We will talk about that, and it is called like also the tetrabyl acid. Regarding the intracellular buffers, we're having organic phosphate like AMP, ADP, ATP, and 2,3-bisphosphoglycerate. And we're having also proteins, like mostly the proteins which are like imidazoles or alpha amino groups of the proteins, which are having the pKs within the physiological condition. Also, hemoglobin is a really good buffer. And we're having also the oxyhemoglobin, which is better in sense of the oxyhemoglobin than oxyhemoglobin. Questions? Yeah. Also, phosphate is also tetrabyl acid. Yeah, like regarding the carbon dioxide, we already mentioned and we will speak about that. And that's important to know regarding the carbon dioxide, that CO2 plus water will give us carbonic acid, and then like it can degenerate and give us like protons and bicarbonate ions. And bicarbonate ions are either reserved or as a sodium bicarbonate mostly. And vice versa, like sodium bicarbonate can again degenerate and give us CO2 and water, HCO. And like this is how the respiratory acidosis and alkalosis is happening. I guess you did it in the respiration already, but we will go through it one more time. Regarding the hemoglobin, as you know, like the CO2 diffuses across the red blood cell membranes, and they don't need some kind of transport mechanism at all. We are having like here in the hemoglobin buffer system bicarbonate again, which is like diffused into the plasma, and we're having like the also chloride important there because chloride channels are taking part in it. And hemoglobin it is like helps prevent like major changes and major changes in pH regarding that. Phosphate buffers I've already mentioned. We can have a break now, and then we're starting the acid-base balance and mechanisms. So, yeah. Yeah, sure. Do you have specific question on that? Okay. So yeah, let's have a break for like 10 minutes. Yeah, let's continue, guys. So, from these slides there is a huge text written down, so we will not read it like out loud today. I will just explain what the main ideas of the acid-base balance in the kidneys. And yeah, so we're having like acid-base balance, right? And acid-base balance, it can be regulated by the kidneys by two ways. First of all, it is like the reabsorption of the bicarbonate, as we're having here on painted, and another it is like the excretion of the proton ions, right? And proton ions can be excreted as a tetrable acid, or like the phosphor what we mentioned, or either as a NH4, right, ammonium. So let's start with the reabsorption of the bicarbonate here, and we're having mostly like almost like fully like cleared the bicarbonate, and reabsorbed around 99%. And where we're having the reabsorption in the proximal columulated tubules, loop of Henle, distal tubules, and collecting ducts. And here you see how they are reabsorbed, right? So, do you want me to paint it one more time, or we will go through the here? Okay, so normally we're having here like the release of the protons in the lumen through the sodium proton like exchanger, right? And in the lumen we're having the proton combined with the bicarbonate that it is normally already filtered. We're having H2SO3 created, and by the brush membrane carbonic anhydrasa we're getting like CO2 and water, and CO2 is entering the cell. Here the same reactions are happening, like we're creating H2CO3 with the carbonic anhydrasa intracellular, and we are getting again the proton and bicarbonate. This is the way how the bicarbonate has entered the cell. So protons are coming out again one more time, and bicarbonate can be transmitted to the blood by several ways. Either it is through the bicarbonate chloride counter transporter, or by the sodium bicarbonate co-transporter together. So meaning that, judging from that, we can see that all the reabsorbed all the filtered bicarbonate, we are reabsorbed it in the blood. Instead of the chloride here, we can have some, like for example glucose, ammonia, or phosphate, anything that it is important for the cell. Questions? Yeah, like the or like stay here. Yeah, it is going all wrong. Yeah, the idea here it is like that during every bicarbonate, like so every bicarbonate is going to the blood, we're having release of one proton in the lumen. That's easy, right? It's clear. Yeah, 2 bicarbonate into the blood, 1 proton outside the cell. Yeah. CO2 is going inside, but water is staying out. Yeah. The chloride, if you remember here, chloride is living. We are having sodium potassium pH, which I'm not mentioning already because I guess you know it. Did you get this? Can you repeat? That's always like that. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. This is the physiology how it is happening. Yeah. So one more thing, in the proximal convoluted tubule we're having isosmotic reabsorption, right, if you remember? Yeah. Okay, now judging from this information, can you tell me what will happen when we're having ECF volume expansion? What will have extracellular fluid expansion? How it will be seen on the bicarbonate reabsorption? Why increase, why decrease? It's not correct. We are having expansion, meaning more water in the extracellular fluid. We don't need we are blocking like this osmotic reabsorption, meaning that less bicarbonate will be reabsorbed. And vice versa with like the volume contraction. Yeah. And with the ESF volume contraction, we are having like vice versa, like the increased reabsorption rate, and what else is going on? We are having renin-angiotensin aldosterone system involved in this all, and also like more and more sodium potassium chart, like this one is working more harder. Okay, so we are reabsorbed like the bicarbonate. What will happen with partial concentration of the CO2? PCO2, what it will be, partial concentration of the CO2. Why? Oh, why increase? That's not correct. It will increase. If you remember, we're having like, despite that bicarbonate is in the blood, it will convert to the same kind of reaction, right, in the blood. So thus we're having like CO2s. So we are increasing the partial concentration of the CO2. And vice versa will happen, right? So meaning that if the partial concentration of the CO2 is rise, meaning that we are having more amount of CO2. Right? Okay, we've done with the proximal convoluted tubule and reabsorption of our bicarbonate, and this everything what I mentioned is written here. One more thing that are missed, like our transporter, like this one and this ones, are having their own threshold, like filter load, so they can reabsorb only like up to 40 milli equiliter on liter, like the our bicarbonate. If this threshold will, like if it will be much more, then we're having high excretion rate of the bicarbonate in the blood. Okay, this is what I mentioned regarding the contractions, the angiotensin system, regarding the ESF volume contraction, that it is stimulating the renin-angiotensin aldosterone system, and renin-angiotensin 2 stimulates the sodium sodium proton exchanger in the proximal tubules, that we're having the reabsorption of the bicarbonate really much, and this is explaining our contraction alkalosis example, for example. And when we're having, for example, the loop diuretics or thiazide diuretics or given to a patient, we're having like the contraction alkalosis. And when, for example, when we're having the vomiting, we're having the metabolic alkalosis. Like regarding the acidosis and alkalosis, we will come back to this situation more time in a few minutes. Partial CO2, like when we're having changes in the CO2, we're having either respiratory acidosis or respiratory alkalosis. So judging like how we are differentiating the diseases like metabolic or respiratory by the bicarbonate or by the CO2 ranges. So yeah, we finished this one also. Questions? No. Yeah, like the reabsorption of the our bicarbonate, it is happening in the proximal tubule, the majority. However, it can happen also a loop of Henle and also in the distal tubules and collecting ducts. But like they are minority. 99% it is in the proximal convoluted tubule. Alpha intercalated. No, we don't have beta intercalated. So. More questions? You don't like shot at something, or you didn't get. Sorry, can you? Aquaporins or there is like mostly histological changes in alpha and beta intercalated cells, but mostly in physiology what we are using that it is like the alpha intercalated cells regarding the bicarbonate and stuff. They're like because majority of the cells it is like the alpha intercalated cells. There might be beta intercalated cells also, but like they are minority and they are doing the same function, so there is no difference between them in physiologic sense. That's why always in all physiology books it is like the alpha intercalated cells mentioned. However, there might be histology changes between alpha and beta. Yeah, so yeah, we are always mentioning alpha intercalated cells. So, do you have more questions regarding this? If not, then we're continuing. So we covered like reabsorption of the bicarbonate, right? Somehow. Now, I've said to you that we are having second mechanism how the protons can be excreted from the cells, and it is either as a tetrable acids or either as an NH4, right? So let's start how they are excreted as an tetrable acids, and as you know here, we are having release of the protons, right? And protons are released from the CO2 and water, then like with the carbonic anhydride we are getting H2CO3, then bicarbonate and proton, and proton is released from the alpha intercalated cells into the lumen through the proton pump, right, which is using the ATP, with the sodium proton pump, again it is using the energy again, and with this we are getting them in the extracellular, in the lumen, right? And in the lumen we're having also the our phosphates right here located, which are like tetrable acids, and they are like normally filtered through the glomerulus. So they are combining together and we are getting H2PO3. And this is our tetrable acid. We created our tetrable acid, which is like ready for excretion. However, like this is how we removed our H pluses from the cell into the lumen, and they are like in a shelter with the tetrable acid, okay? So they are not working there alone. And on the blood side here, as we created bicarbonate is going outside the cell through the chloride channel, There is no 2 or 3 ones, there is just one chloride channel. And here we're having sodium and potassium exchanger. And here every HCO3 is going out, the one the H's are going out also. Like every time that one H is going, one HCO3 is like the reabsorbed back. Now questions regarding that. No questions? Was it clear? Okay. So here it is mentioned somewhere. Yeah, I just put it like the photo for that. So the steps are really easy for that. And final thing regarding the absorptions, reabsorptions, and etc. And then we're starting the diseases already. It is like the excretion of the potassium as the NH4, and it has several steps. It is like, for example, removed from proximal convoluted tubule, then it is reabsorbed in the thick ascending lupule, and then secreted from the collecting duct. So NH4 has like everything. It is removed, reabsorbed, and then secreted. You remember, I hope, what these words means, right? Okay. So let's start with the proximal tubules, and as you see, wait a minute, from where we are getting NH4? From urea, yeah. But what else? Yeah, like urea cycle is correct, one of them. Also, like when we're having like glutamine inside the cell, and it is involved in the urea cycle and degraded, we are getting like NH4 and glutamate, right? And NH4 with a combination of water, it is going with the protons. It removes its proton, and we are getting NH3. And NH3 is going out itself like by diffusion, and NH4 and protons are going through the lumen with the proton sodium pump, and we are in the lumen, we are having collaboration at the proton and NH3 together, and we are getting NH4. Got it? Okay. So when we degraded glutamine with glutaminase till NH4, also we got glutamate, right? Removing of NH4 will give us glutamate, and glutamate is converted into the alpha-ketoglutarate, and alpha-ketoglutarate then it is degraded until the bicarbonate, and bicarbonate is just going outside with the co-transporter sodium bicarbonate, and like yeah, we're having also sodium potassium pump. This is how we're having NH4 outside the cell in the lumen from proximal convoluted tubule. Then in the thick ascending loop, it is not painted at all anywhere. It is just in the text written down that in the thick ascending loop of Henle, if you remember, we are having sodium chloride, potassium transporter, right? They are three ones who are resorbing. In this case, in thick ascending loop of Henle and NH4, it is like joining the cell with this transporter, but instead of potassium. So we are having sodium, ammonium, and chloride transporter. Usually it should be like sodium, potassium chloride, but we don't have like the potassium in that case, and we are having NH4, how it is reabsorbed back to the thick ascending loop of Henle. Yeah. So whenever we're having NH4s. And then we're having alpha intercalated cells of the collecting ducts here, and it should be secreted. The idea here it is like it is secreted from the blood mostly, and we are having like normal situation of our cell breathing, right? And when we're having the cell breathing, the protons are going out with the ATP, and also like with the potassium proton pump. And as you see from medullary interstitium, we are having diffusion of the NH3s, and they are collaborating together, and we're having like the excretion of NH4. On the other side, we're having diffusion of the bicarbonate and sodium potassium pump working as always. Yeah, sure. Okay. I will show you on the kidney anatomy, okay? If you remember this photo, I just didn't want you to go up too far to find it, that's why I showed you. Here. We're having nephron, right? And it is either like C. They are located in the cortex and in the medulla, right? Some of them, so medullary interstitium will be this part. Okay? No questions regarding that? No questions? Well, let me not forget something. Okay. Should I continue with already diseases, or do you want me to re-explain something regarding that? Okay. So what does acidemia means? When we're having high concentration of the proton ions, right, in the blood, meaning that we're having decrease in the pH. In alkalemia, it's vice versa. When we're having decrease in the proton, decrease in the proton ions, and we're having increase in pH, right? Alkalemia can be as alkalosis, or acidemia can be as same as acidosis. We're having two types of them. We're having respiratory and metabolic. What's the difference between them now? When we're having for example, metabolic acidosis, it is caused by decreased concentration of the bicarbonate in the for example, the lumen, right? And in the blood. And when we are having metabolic alkalosis, it is vice versa, the increased amount of the bicarbonate in the blood. So HCO3 matters in the metabolic cases. When we are having respiratory acidosis, it is caused by the retention of CO2 lots. And when we're having respiratory alkalosis, we are excreting, like with the respiration, lots of CO2. So judging from that, we can say that whenever we're having hypoventilation, we're having high CO2, and we're having rise in PC, partial pressure of CO2. And when we're having hyperventilation, we're having decrease in CO2, meaning decrease in the partial pressure of CO2, and we're having high pH. Okay? And questions regarding this? No. And we're having compensatory mechanisms, right? How we can resolve this problem. Whenever we're having metabolic disturbance, we're having respiratory compensation. And vice versa, when we're having the respiratory disturbance, we're having some kind of metabolic compensation. So these are metabolic acidosis, metabolic alkalosis, respiratory acidosis, and respiratory alkalosis. So this is exactly what we mean here. So whenever we're having metabolic acidosis, low pH, high proton concentration, primary disturbance is like low bicarbonate, and after some time we're having like the decrease in PCO2. And here compensation will happen from the respiratory acidosis, right? Here vice versa. So after some time we will have rise on PCO2. Respiratory acidosis, it is decreased pH and increased proton concentration. And we're having primary disturbance like high PCO2, and we're having also after some time a high bicarbonate. And Then alkalosis is vice versa when we are having low partial CO2 and low HCO3. This is like the same again, how they are compensating. One more time to just go through it. And here we're having like by formula, I really like this formula that it is written here to understand how it is moving. For example, in the respiratory acidosis we are having low CO2, that's why we are having low high protons and low bicarbonate. Respiratory acidosis we are having high CO2. Respiratory alkalosis we are having low this one, like the CO2, and how they can be compensated by the hyperventilation or hypoventilation, and how the corrections will be done from the renal compensation, for example. So idea beneath this, like when you will read, you should understand that like despite when we are having respiratory or metabolic alkalosis, they are always compensated by vice versa. Yeah. Yes. And vomiting will give us what? Yeah. Yeah, that I mentioned. Wait a minute, I will make some. So one more time, let's go through metabolic acidosis, what that is, and then anionic gap, metabolic alkalosis, and this stuff. So when we're having metabolic acidosis, we're having decrease in loss of base products, decrease at trillayer bicarbonate level mostly. And here acidemia can be causes like hyperventilation, small breathing, and it is our respiratory mechanism. Like this part we already discussed, right? Here what it is matters, like I want to highlight you regarding the metabolic acidosis, the serum anion gap. Like what's that? So despite that we're having like disturbance in bicarbonate and anions, for example, we are having also anion gap. Anion gap, it is like, for example, here, as you see, it's cations and anions, right? Bicarbonate, chloride, and there is some kind of anion gap which is unmeasured. We can't measure them, and they are protein, phosphate, citrate, or sulfate, right? So normally the value of the serum anion gap, it is around 12 milliliters. It is ranging from 8 to 16. And based on that, like either we can have increased or decreased the anionic gap. So serum anionic gap, if it is increased, meaning that like we're having like more phosphate, lactate, beta hydroxy, butyric acid or formate, and is increased to replace our bicarbonate. And if it is decreased, meaning that we're concentration of the chloride is increased to replace the our bicarbonate. So actually like we are ranging with that and measuring this pace. Okay. And according to that, we can have like, can you see guys this well? We are having like the schematic overview of our metabolic alkalosis, acidosis, and etc. Let's describe that and then go like in more detail. So when we're having like pH change, pH, like how we are on exam studying metabolic alkalosis and acidosis. First of all, is it pH high or low? High, then a 7.35, or like low is the 7.3, depending. So if we are having pH low than 7.3, it is already our acidosis, right? Situation. We don't know either it is respiratory or metabolic, right? Then we are checking or measuring our partial pressure of CO2. If partial pressure of CO2 is really high, for example, more than 44 milliliter of hydrargium, we can say that this is respiratory acidosis. Why? to risen up, right? And it can be caused by some kind of hypoventilation disorders like the airway obstruction or the chronic lung disease, or opioids or sedatives, or some kind of substance that it is giving us some kind of hypoventilation, right? If we don't have anything mentioned and we're having like mentioned only bicarbonate, and bicarbonate it is less than 20, we are talking that this is our metabolic acidosis. However, we are having metabolic acidosis based on anion gap, either normal or either rising up, right? How we are calculating by formula our anion gap? We are taking sodium concentration minus some of the chloride and bicarbonate concentration. So if you will see this slide here, you can say like this, sodium plus bicarbonate chloride concentration, and this space will be free. Like we will get like this number, anion gap. Either it is normal, either it is like decreased. So if it is like increased anion gap, it should be more than 12 milliliters, for example. And how to remember what caused the high anion gap? It is like the mnemonic word for that, gold mark. It is like glycolysis, for example, lactic acid, D-lactate, methanol, aspirin, renal failure, or like any kind of ketones. So mostly acidic stuff. And if it is normal, if it is like between from 8 to 12 milliliter on liter, it is like the mnemonic hard S, and it is like hyperchromia, Addison's disease, renal tubular acidosis, diarrhea, spironolactone, or saline. They are giving us normal anionic gap. Yeah. We are having two conformation of the lactate. Clear this part. Metabolic acidosis is better, like the concentration numbers, it's not changing because sodium might be that much, or like the chloride might be vice versa. Clear? When we're having alkalemia, it is like when we're having high pH level, more than 7.4. In this case, we are also checking either partial pressure of CO2 or bicarbonate. If the partial pressure of CO2 is less than 36, meaning that we're having like respiratory alkalosis and we're having some kind of hyperventilation. It can be like more breathing, right? So it can be any kind of pregnancy, panic attack, tumor, embolism, like salicylate intoxication, or hypoxia, right? And if it is like bicarbonate, it is like more than 28, then we can say that we are having metabolic alkalosis. In this case, we are checking our urine chloride level, because depending on that, either we're having saline resistant or saline responsive disorders. If the chloride level it is more than 20, we're having saline resistant disorders, and it can be like, for example, Bartter disorder, Geltman disorder, we studied that already, or hyperaldosteronism. And if it is like less than 20, we're having vomiting, recurrent, recent loop tide diuretics, or antacids cause that. Clear? Oh. So according to that, if you will see closely here, we are having the chart. Let's say I will move it a bit to see. And on USMLE exams and everywhere, they really like to use these lines without the colors to tell which is which. So as you see here, metabolic, like why it is not linear, because it is logarithmic, right? Everything here. This is why it is linear before it is the buffer line. So we're having like metabolic acidosis, and as you see, plasma concentration of bicarbonate can be around 25, and pH it is like the maximum is 7.4, right? Below this it is metabolic acidosis. Here respiratory acidosis, it is like rising in low of a partial CO2, right? And pressure is low also, and both of them we can have mixed acidosis, meaning that bicarbonate also can rise at some point, can rise the partial pressure, and the pH will be low. Sorry, what? Low. pH in metabolic acidosis is low here. Here pH is rising, so why it should be other side. There are acidosis, both of them. Yeah, we have not started alkalosis yet. Both of them are acidosis, what we discussed. We have not done that yet. So now talking about respiratory alkalosis. As we see, pH is rising, bicarbonate is rising a bit, but our PCO, partial pressure of CO2, is rising much, right? Regarding the metabolic alkalosis, we are having the rise in bicarbonate, pH is rising also a bit, and the PCO3 it is also like partial of CO2, it is also rising. Okay, clear. Now, this is already what I'm talked about. It is a summary, and we are having like renal tubular acidosis disorders. You can't see, right? So I will try somehow to cut this photo and make it more visible for you. So, we are having renal tubular disorders that are really important in our acid-base balance. Yeah, I guess it's more visible. So when we're having, for example, renal tubular acidosis type 1, it is like for inability of alpha intercalated cells to secrete H pluses. So there will be no new bicarbonate generated, and we're having metabolic acidosis. And in this case, like let's see this photo one more time. Here. Like here, right? So meaning that our intercalated cells cannot secrete our H pluses, so new bicarbonate cannot be reabsorbed, and the pH of our urine will be more than 5.5. Potassium level will drop, and this can be caused by some kind of drugs like the fungal drugs, or some kind of nephropathies, or obstruction of the urinary tract, and they are having like the complications like the risk of the calcium phosphate stones mostly, and due to the urine pH is high. Another thing that we're having, it is our proximal renal tubular acidosis, and this will be involved in the quiz between. And here we are having, as you see, in the proximal convoluted tubule problem, and they are excreting too much bicarbonate in the urine, and we are having metabolic acidosis. And when the urine is so high, so acid, let's say, alpha intercalated cells and the collecting ducts cannot come over with the enough bicarbonate excretion. Again, if we, depending on the situation, we can have either low urine pH or high urine pH more than 5.5. When it is filtered, then we're having like an excreted, like this after this threshold we're having high, and when below this threshold we're having like the acid urine mostly. And causes can be our Fanconi syndrome or multiple myeloma or some kind of carbonic acid anhydrasis. And the final one, we are having hyperkalemic tubular acidosis, and which is caused by the hyperaldosteronism or aldosterone resistance, and we're having, for example, hyperkalemia, meaning our NH3 level will be low, and meaning that we're having low excretion of NH4, right? The pH of urine will be variable, and we're having decreased production of the aldosterone. It can be caused by any kind of like any heparin or non-steroidal inflammatory drugs or some kind of aldosterone sparing ducts. Questions regarding that? Yeah. Yeah. No. Which cell? They can, but that would not be enough. Like diffusion of the potassium is taking place like normally, like in the action potential they are creating the strength, right? For example, the membrane, but like not in this case. More questions, guys? No? Okay. So then, thank you for today. Have a nice evening.